It doesn't look like it. You've got a singlet on.
well, it's warm inside. I closed the windows.
Oh yeah, well, sure. Here's me like freezing my ass off. Got my double tracky pants on at the moment, just doubled up.
Yeah,
Anyways,
full winter gear.
have you had a good week so far? Has it been busy?
It's been a really good week. Yeah, I've been you know, coaching, recording stuff. I actually put up that presentation yesterday on energy systems that I've been working on for a couple weeks. Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm pretty happy to have that out. That was a good thing done.
What did you cover in that? Just as a quick question.
Kind of went over the new model of bioenergetics, kind of the update of the old model, I guess, that's everybody uses still, the anaerobic alactic, anaerobic lactic, because at the end of the day, if you look at all the evidence from the last 20 plus years, and if you look at practical data such as what you get with the Moxie monitor, there is no 10-second is anaerobic alactic and then blah blah blah. It's oxygen is tightly linked to phosphocreatine. Phosphocreatine, just to sum it up, phosphocreatine is the only pathway that is fast enough to resynthesize ATP to fuel contractions, and so you have that kind of chain of all the system, all the pathways working together. It's never one more versus the others. And then there's the role that glycogen plays, which is pretty central, which is not really talked about in the other model. We talk about glycolysis as being that anaerobic lactic pathway, but that one actually plays a pretty small role compared to glycogenolysis, so the breakdown of glycogen in the presence of oxygen. Once oxygen goes out the window, then glycolysis kind of picks up the slack, hence the accumulation of lactate due to the non-lactate oxidation by the oxidative system. So essentially the system that we all learned, or the model that we all learned is wrong. There's no other way of saying that. And then the words that we use, anaerobic alactic, those don't make any sense either from a physiological standpoint. And so trying to reframe that, show what papers have come out and what evidence there is to support that, and then try to give some practical concepts. We talked about physiological limiters in terms of respiratory delivery, muscular, so oxygen utilization, and then occlusion trends in the muscle, so compression reactions, venous occlusions, arterial occlusions. And then Evan Picon did a little guest segment to explain proxy tests that you can use to potentially determine physiological limiters without having a Moxie monitor available.
What's a Moxie monitor?
It tracks SMO2, so oxygen oxygen saturation in the muscle in real time. And so you can put it on the quad and see what's going on the graph right away in terms of how much O2 is there. I guess it's the balance. It's not an absolute value, it's a relative value. So it's how much is being delivered versus how much is being used. And it actually correlates pretty closely to performance in terms of, when you reach, very low percentages of SMO2, you're not moving anymore. Like power drops substantially, and you stop pretty soon thereafter. And so you can use it to do some physiological testing. You can also use it to auto-regulate training depending on what outcome you're seeking. And so it opens that kind of new door to how to look at training. I know there's got to be a couple presentations on the Moxie Monitor YouTube channel about people that use it in Ironman training.
Really?
That have been using it for quite some years now, from what I understand. Wow. Yeah, so I can send you the link afterwards.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I just thought it'd be quite interesting to and I might ask you it today in our little chat about how you now then look at, I guess, from a coaching standpoint when you implement energy system work, and how I guess what you used to know versus what you know now from just what you've told me,
Mm-hmm.
and the research you've done on, I guess, is there any sort of differences in the way you go about energy system work and conditioning for your athletes?
Yeah, I think it does change a little bit in the sense that depending on what your athlete is limited by, the protocols that he or she is going to need and use are going to be different. Somebody who, let's say, to take kind of an archetype, the beginner who has no experience, well, I mean, he's gonna need everything to improve. But if we just take it as a simplified idea, maybe he's bad at utilizing oxygen in the muscle, right? So you could give him cardiac output type stuff all day long. He can bring more blood, more O2, but if he can't use it, if he doesn't have the mitochondrial density, the capillaries, maybe even the neuromuscular coordination to fire in the right sequence, then he's not going to be able to use that oxygen. So what he probably needs is some type of repeat sprint activity, which you could call desaturation training in that kind of lingo, in order to help him improve those parameters. And then once that goes up, then everything else will go up with it. So I think that the main difference is that it's not like kind of a broad brush of everybody will respond to all the different methods maybe. But hey, if you're limited by your cardiac output, then maybe that's something you should work on. And then most of the time, from what I understand and what I see, for elite or advanced endurance athletes, the main limiter is either going to be delivery or respiration, or a combination of both, right? It doesn't have to be one or the other. And then that
delivery, sorry, is that delivery at like low intensity, like zone 2 type heart rate?
It's actually going to be higher up in the intensity spectrum. But when you kind of push the performance to its limits, what is going to be the bottleneck? What is going to prevent you from going farther? And through using either the Moxy or those proxy tests that Evan talks about, you can determine most likely which system is maybe lagging behind a little bit, or really just the bottleneck, the rate limiting step. And then by improving that, everything else is going to improve. And what's interesting to me in that realm as well is it opens the door to respiratory training, which I'm not familiar with yet. I'm going to have Brian Kosak on the podcast, who's been doing that for years. So that's where, the Spyro Tiger as a tool comes in. And I mean, it's really kind of a whole new world that I don't yet really understand, because you can think of parameters such as, respiratory frequency, depth of inspiration, expiration, so volume, tidal volume, I guess. And then can you maintain certain volumes at certain breathing frequencies? Then you have the strength of your diaphragm and breathing, apparatus. You have the endurance of those muscles as well that can become limiting factors. Are you limited by the fact that you can't load oxygen into your blood, or can't you extract CO2 out of the blood afterwards? So that whole paradigm that I wasn't even aware of before is kind of opened up. So it just means more work to try and figure out what's going on in that realm.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll ask you, like, in terms of energy systems and whatnot, because I know I do my work with energy systems is going to be like probably a very different way of going about it to the way you go about training, because it's field athletes versus endurance athletes. And obviously I haven't worked with things like the Moxy monitor or anything, but I go by old school sort of methods with and not necessarily old school methods, but and there's always new research coming into those old school methods and whatnot. But when it comes to heart rate training and doing sort of things like MAF tests, so I don't know whether you know Phil Maffetone, but
the name rings a bell, but I'm not familiar with his work.
Yeah, and so we just do low intensity testing for like top of zone 2 aerobic efficiency via the MAF test, and that's essentially just finding your MAF heart rate, and that might just be it's an equation initially based on your age and injury risk and all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Once they have that, they just have to run for 4 kilometers at that MAF heart rate, trying to sustain that, plus or minus 2 beats per minute.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them can't actually sustain it. Like, they'll have to walk. They have to go so slow that they're that inefficient at that low heart rate that they have to walk to keep it stable at that MAF heart rate. So it's interesting because I found with my athletes, I can't get the most out of, like, they can't get the most out of higher intensity training unless they've made their zone 2 heart rate really efficient and are able to actually sustain that for a good duration without having to be super, super slow or walk.
Yeah.
So sort of trying to, I guess it comes back to the old school programming of trying to actually build that base of aerobic, slow distance sort of stuff initially, low heart rate, and then be efficient to then be able to do your threshold efforts and actually not blow out too high into like VO2 max so it's interesting stuff.
I think what's interesting with the new idea and the new model is you don't have to throw out everything that you do, right? All the training methods that you use, they work, right? If your athletes are improving, they work. What it does, it gives one, I think it's interesting to reconsider the vocabulary that we use with our athletes or in our coaching, or just to be more precise about what's going on. Do we have to say alactic and aerobic? Can we just say sprint, or can we just say a high intensity effort, short duration? Yep. Would that be, more simple? And then on the training method side, like you said, I think all the quote unquote old school methods, or the ones that everybody still uses, those things work, right? Because people keep improving. I think you have to start asking questions when you have non-responders. For example, when you have 1 or 2 athletes that it worked for everybody else, but it didn't work for them. And that's when maybe taking that lens of, okay, maybe they have a different physiological limiter than my other athletes, and that's why they're not responding to that type of training. And that's when that nuance becomes interesting. It gives you kind of just a new perspective on how to look at things, but it doesn't mean that you have to throw out the baby with the bathwater and start from scratch on everything that you do, because obviously what you do works. Otherwise you'd be looking for other answers if your athletes weren't improving, if that makes sense.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'll definitely have to give that new the new episode you just released on energy systems a watch. Yeah, and it'd be good to chat further about that. But I had a few questions listed that I wanted to ask you today.
Go for it.
So is that so we can just start and then we'll just roll on in?
It's already rolling, so you can ask whatever you want.
I thought you were going to edit it or something. Anyway.
I'm lazy. I don't like editing, so I just put it all out as it is.
All right. Well, what are some of your biggest learnings when it comes to coaching individuals, so that you've learnt in like your whole career so far?
So as in biggest lessons that I've taken, or the things that I think about when I'm coaching individuals?
Yeah, when it comes to coaching individuals, and maybe when building their programs and then coaching them through their individual strength and conditioning programs. Yeah,
I think it's going to largely depend on their level, but in the last couple of years, I think I've made a shift from. Don't get me wrong, I still spend time programming and planning and doing all those things, but I think the money lies in the execution of the program, and then how the athlete or the client perceives the program, and then what their mindset is going through it. So yes, the program is important, but then how they do it is even more important. Can I teach them how to remain flexible, for example? Because I work with a couple, 1 or 2 people that train a lot, that could be considered semi-professional, but that's not my main, let's say, client base at the moment. So for the people that do train a lot, you need to, it comes down a lot to how they see their training, and do they have a framework in their mind as to what is important at that time of year, given that I'm close or far away from competition time, or in the competition season? So the focus has to be different, and sometimes they still have that mindset of, okay, the strength and conditioning is obviously important, but they do the same thing all year round, right? Where I think as the strength and conditioning coach that in the competition season, strength and conditioning has to take a bit of a back seat. It doesn't have to disappear, but you don't need nearly as much volume as in the off season. For example, with Nico, my guy who sails, right now he's got the European Championships coming up next week. So do I want him to do like 1 or 2 strength sessions in the coming week just to stay fresh? Sure. Do I want him to do, 3 lower body days like we were doing in the off season? Absolutely not. I actually want him, we spoke about this, I want him to go on the lake if he can 2 days in a row, get some really hard boat sessions in, just to get a bit of that sting that he's going to find in competition again. Because what he told me last week after his previous race was that he felt really good physically, mentally, technically on the boat, but he felt like that extra 10% that you give in competition, he wasn't really accustomed to. And so I think that's something that needs to be worked into the training, right? So putting aside the numbers in the gym and not worrying that, you maybe lose 5 kilos on your squat, or that your upper body work isn't as, you're not doing as much volume, but how good am I on the boat? Does it make the boat go faster? Is that, that saying that I think it came from the British rowing team a few years ago when they decided to go kind of all in and try to go for the Olympic gold, if my memory serves. And essentially they ran every decision through the lens of, does it make the boat go faster? Should we do this for the athletes? Well, does it make it go faster? Yes, no. And that was the deciding factor. And so I think really shifting that mindset to the competition. If that's your goal, everything needs to be geared towards this. And sometimes it means that strength and conditioning is not the primary thing that you have to think about or focus on. And then for people that don't train as much, I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to bring is flexibility in how to execute the program in terms of, okay, how's your weekly schedule? Do you have a crazy week this week? How do we still make it work? What's the most important thing to get in? What if you have a half an hour instead of an hour in the gym? What do you do first? And teaching those little things so people remain flexible and adaptable, and they're not rigid and they're like, oh, well, you planned 4 sessions and I only did 2, so my life is over, that kind of thing. I think for me, that's been the biggest thing that I'm trying to convey through my coaching is really being as flexible as possible. And then in the program in and of itself, well, it really depends on, again, everybody's goals, what time of the year it is. For example, with my rugby guys, we're in season now, and so strength work is down to 2 sessions at the most.
So you were talking about, it obviously differs between the level of the person that you're coaching and where they're at in their training. And I just wanted to sort of like expand on that with your coaching philosophy, like if you have a particular philosophy that you sort of go by when it comes to coaching.
I think it's all about the individual. I think that would probably be the overarching theme of my philosophy, that it has to be tailored to, everything has to be tailored to the point in time, the state of the athlete or the person, who they are as a person from a personality standpoint as well. I think those are the most important things that are going to make it so that the program is sustainable long term, that it actually matches the person, rather than just imposing something on someone as a kind of a blanket way of doing things. So that would probably be my overarching theme. And then, basic principles of strength training, I guess, but progressive overload in terms of the intensities that they're able to reach, the complexity of the movements that they do, the volume that they do over time, just to try and always keep progressing, try to always kind of uncover some new things to do, maybe go on some tangents left and right to explore different things that might be beneficial, but always keep the goal, as Dan John would say, and always aim towards that. Have a very open line of communication with the client or the athlete is really important to me as well, that they can tell me anything that they want. They can tell me, hey, I don't like this program right now. And, maybe it's the case that we can do it slightly differently, and that they'll get more, I'll get more buy-in from them. Maybe it is that if they have certain specific goals, this is what they have to do. And then if they don't like it, then they need to decide between, do I want to change my goals, or do I just need to suck it up and do it? But I try to, and trying to always question myself and what I do. Is it enough? Is it correct? Are they getting what they're seeking out of it? So I guess those would be the primary things that I think about when you talk about philosophy.
Yeah, and so when you, I guess, even expanding on that a little bit more, when you consider the science behind phasing out training and having general prep and then more specific prep and things like that, and then comparing or balancing out the science with actual performance health, and then, you know, as you said, what's valuable to you in terms of philosophy, being able to respond to the athlete, being flexible to how they respond. How do you balance that, and where do your values lie when it comes to the science and you know, having a specific program and how, like, you've got these principles that you go by and as you said, progressive overload and where you need to get them to with different phases, but then performance health and keeping them injury free and things like that.
I think teaching them how to listen to themselves, and like physically and mentally as well, knowing that, hey, I've had a really hard week at work. I shouldn't be expecting the same numbers out of the gym as I would be on a week where I'm fresh. You know, one of my clients recently had a child, and so he's a father, and that changes a few things around sleep patterns, which then impacts everything. And so just being cognizant of that ahead of time, talking about it a lot with him, just so that he knows that, you know what, if you don't feel fresh in the gym for the next few weeks or months, that's normal, and we'll maybe do a bit of damage control, maybe reduce the intensity, the volume, and like you said, keep them injury free as much as possible when it comes to, you know, intensity. Like if you talk about speed or heavy weights, making sure they know that those things can be maximal efforts when they're feeling great. And if they're not feeling in top shape, then maybe they should just pull back just a little bit. Especially to not go in that zone where we risk getting injured, and especially for the non-professional athletes, which is most of the people that I work with. There's nothing to be gained, you know, short term. And oh no, I want to do the session exactly how it's written down, because no, it's not about that. It's about, can you do everything that you have to do the rest of the week and the rest of the month? For me, that's a lot more important than getting that one session perfectly done. And then talked about science a little bit. I try to use testing at regular intervals to gauge progress. But I also, especially in, say, sports, yes, we want the let's say the strength and conditioning metrics to go up, but I want my athletes to feel good. For example, if I work with rugby players, I want them to feel good when they're playing the game of rugby. Their numbers on the side are great, and that looks good on my resume, but at the end of the day, they could have, you know, great conditioning on the test, but then they look like shit on the pitch. And so I'm not interested in that. So trying to, yes, tests are important, but they have their limits in terms of transfer to actual sporting events, when it's not like a stopwatch sport where it's clear, you know. Well, I guess then you have to even put in the nuance of the execution, you know, where they're physically ready, but then mentally they couldn't actually exploit their full potential in that race. That's possible as well. So is that something that we need to address? So trying to always keep all those things in mind, and trying to be as I guess balanced between those different things as possible. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. I just think it's interesting. Every coach is different in the way they approach it, and because you know, you coach primarily with rugby and more field sport, and I'm more endurance and long distance straight line running, and I guess rehab's completely, like I work with in rehab, and then performance health there is completely different to performance health of people who aren't actually recovering from injury as per se. So yeah, it's just interesting to know. But I guess when you're assessing an athlete or a client, what would be your key principles that you're looking for, that you might go through in an assessment for, key areas of strength and conditioning and movement?
I have a very quote unquote basic way of assessing people, especially for general pop clients. I want them to have the required ranges of motion before they do certain movements. So if they don't have really good, shoulder flexion, they're not going to be doing chin ups from a dead hang, for example. And that might be, the stretching aspect and the mobility aspect is something that we might work in over time. But I feel like the time dedicated for somebody, let's say somebody in their 50s, the time that you would dedicate to gain 10 or 15 degrees of shoulder flexion is that time in order for them to be able to be comfortable in a dead hang, for example, and do chin-ups from the bottom. Is that worth the time compared to putting that time towards the range that they already have accessible, that is enough for everyday life, let's say, and that if they don't have a sporting event that requires them to get in those positions, then I'll usually err on the side of, hey, let's push your strength, let's push your endurance, and those other factors that overall are gonna, in my opinion, be more important for overall health than 10 extra degrees of shoulder flexion. I think if you, and I mean, it's kind of easy to resort to the data or to fall back on the data for that, but it's clear that being strong and being healthy from a cardiovascular standpoint or cardiorespiratory standpoint are two primary factors in long-term quality of life, and way beyond can you hang from a bar with perfect shoulder position and rib cage position. So that's kind of the side that I err on, especially with my general population clients. The assessment is usually a session where I run them through some basic movement patterns. So they'll do a bunch of squats, some light squats, maybe some goblet squats with elevated heels, and we'll do some, maybe a push up or some kind of pressing, like a push, a pull, a squat, a hinge, some unilateral stuff, some basic core work. And I'll see what they can do and what they can't do from that kind of little circuit. I'll maybe throw in a little bit of cardio in the middle. So it's not a very formal assessment in terms of, I don't put them on a table. I don't do those kinds of tests, especially not for the general population clients. If they have issues down the line, I'll either look into that or I'll refer out to someone who can really handle that well, because I'm not trained to do table tests and stuff like that, and I don't have enough understanding of the nuances to do a good job of it. So I would rather refer out to a physio or someone who understands that better than I do. And I try to focus on really output, and then the mindset around exercise and building the habits, because that's going to be a lot more important in the long run. Can I get them to do a session? If they do one session a week with me in person, can I get them to do a session by themselves during the week? And how do I get to that point? Is that something that you impose from day one? Okay, so if you train with me, you have to do all this at home. Or do you kind of slowly let them build up, mentally themselves, that, okay, we're doing all this work, it's productive, we're seeing returns, and now the next logical step is to add in the second day. But I try to get to the point where it comes from them, where I don't have to impose it, but they're actually asking, hey, could I train at home? Can I do something? What should I do? And that's when you've kind of quote unquote won, because they decided to do it. You didn't have to impose it. And so for long-term success for me, that's going to be a lot more important than oh no, you need to do 3 right out of the gate because otherwise it's not worth it, etc. So for me, those are the kind of the key things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, does that differ in terms of assessment, like when you're assessing an athlete that comes to you and says, I want to improve my ability to, to sprint faster or perform better on the field? What are you looking for when it comes to strength and conditioning components for athletes if you're assessing them?
It's going to vary greatly from one athlete to the next, depending on their sport and their needs. For example, my rugby guys, I'll get them to do a basic conditioning test to see where they are in terms of general fitness. If I have them with me, I'll get them to do a sprint test as well, so that we have some data to rely on on the speed side of things. Very much focus on the quality of the biomechanics side of things in the sprinting. So quantitative with the test, but qualitative as well through like a kilogram, to give them some pointers as to what is going to help them improve, and then trying to reinforce that through the different speed sessions that they do. And then if there's specific things that they need to, get better at for their game, for example, jumping in a line out, being more powerful, well, we might orient the gym work towards that. And I'll rely on some metrics, again, physical metrics, but a lot more on how they feel. Do they feel much better on the field? And then does that correlate with what other people see? Do we hear over time, oh, he's gotten much better at jumping, or he's gotten much more powerful, or he's a lot more physical now than he used to be? All those things, and they might not be as cut and dry as hard data and quantifiable metrics, but I feel that they're more important in the realm of getting better at your sport, and so I try to orient it towards that. With Nico, whom I mentioned before, who Seales, we're actually still working on developing or trying to develop some tests that are going to give us some information that's valuable for the boat. So he's always in that hiking position on the boat, so kind of 3/4 of his body off the boat, and maneuvering through the waves and stuff like that. So a lot of tension in the quads. He does a lot of cycling, which we talked about before as well. And he's got a bench that he can use that kind of mimics that hiking position that he can do on dry land. And so trying to find a testing protocol that gives us information as to how fit is he for the boat. When we're in the off season, how many times a week does he need to do bench work at home in order so that when he goes back on the boat, he's not completely out of boat shape, quote unquote. So I think going through that process and trying to really think about the sport and the needs of the athlete as the primary thing, and then have everything fall from that, instead of going the other way around and being like, okay, we're just going to do strength and we're going to do some conditioning, and really just, I guess, reverse engineering the sport would be the term, maybe the most appropriate term. And for Nico, for example, I didn't know what it looked like even on a boat before I started working with him. So getting him to send me videos, explain exactly how a race works, how many days is a competition, because all those things I have to know and learn in order to be able to do my job, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to initial assessments of an athlete, like the way I go about it is more movement related. So I look at what they can and can't do in terms of human gait, and whether that's walking or running gait, and again, applying it to their specific sport. In my case, it's long distance running. And what are their weaknesses? Is it coordination? Is it a neuromuscular? Or is it literally joint mobility and the ability to access all three planes of movement? And I think, if you're talking about your athletes and rugby athletes, is that something that you prioritize in terms of looking at movement and biomechanics? I mean, how important is looking at, say, running mechanics for you for their field development, like ability to cut and then sprint well in terms of the biomechanics of their actual run mechanics as per se? Is that something that you look at in terms of trying to optimize when it comes to their training within the program?
Yeah, I think it's a really important component. From an efficiency standpoint on the field of play, it's going to be hugely important so that they don't, quote unquote, leak energy and lose steam sooner than they could have. So on that side, the mechanics for me are very important. Hence the kilogram that I usually do with them to assess that, especially on the sprinting side of things. And I truly think that all the work that's done in sprinting trickles down to all other areas of running at lower intensities. So raising that
Yeah.
ceiling of performance, yeah, and improving that speed reserve, as Derek Hansen talks about, I think is super important. And so, yeah, I do focus quite a bit on those components, because, getting them more comfortable doing the thing that they're going to be doing for 90% of the game is going to be hugely, well, it's put like that. It is one of the most important things. So no, it's a big part, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think something that is not well known in the endurance realm at the moment is like how at the moment, if they have a poor technique or that an inefficient technique, it's they think they just need to improve technique under that low speed. But it's actually when we look at their higher speed running that we can probably get the most benefit and the most, I guess, ability to transform their running efficiency through actually coaching the skill of sprinting and proper mechanics in terms of being able to have those attractors that Franz Bosch talks about, the foot strike from above, and your pelvis to be able to actually get into a hip lock and things like this. So that's huge. Whenever I do a running mechanics analysis, it's actually looking at their ability to do these things that you can do in sprinting, that should be done in sprinting with all good sprinters that we see, and then be able to, how do we transfer that to a distance run? It's actually just making leg cycling motion smaller and doing everything to a much smaller range of movement when it comes to, obviously having to prolong that for an hour, not 10 seconds. So, but yeah, so I just find it interesting, in terms of the depth that you might go into that sort of stuff with your rugby guys, and in terms of coaching mechanical drills and things like that for coordination. I think it's a really cool thing to have, because in terms of even coming back from an ACL, I've got a lot of soccer guys that I do that with at the moment, and return to play is like, that's, it's all a big part of it is mechanics and optimizing their biomechanics and their ability to actually move well, and how we should be able to. So it's an interesting thing to see, different coaches and the way they like to implement, different styles and methods of strength conditioning when it comes to then optimizing field performance. So
yeah, for me, the sprinting, in relationship to endurance running, for me, sprinting would be strength training, specific strength training for running, right? Because the ground contact forces they can experience are very, very high in sprinting, much higher than in a long distance run. So if you can train at those higher intensities, or train to develop those higher intensity outputs, now again, I guess speed reserve, but you could also consider all the other reserve factors in terms of working at maximal intensity and then competing at sub-maximal intensity. And that reserve is developed in not only the speed, but the strength as well, and all those other areas. So for me, it is a very, very important part of performance, for sure.
Okay, well, just wrapping things up, what do you think is going to be a big thing in the future? Like, what do you see in the future in terms of, I guess, performance on field and developing, in the strength and conditioning industry? Do you have any sort of, I don't know, like sort of hot topics that you think will be on people's radars in the future with strength conditioning and performance?
I think there's two, when you say that, there's two things that come to mind. One is a much more integrated approach from a staff standpoint when we talk about sporting organizations, referring to the work of James Smith with his Governing Dynamics of Sports Preparation, if that's the name of the book. I think that is one area that is still largely under optimized, maybe. There's so much lack of efficiency, and that's at the amateur level and at the pro level. there's so much, coaches' egos in the game, and it's not all about the players when it should really be all about the players and about the game itself and about maybe the team. And so I think there's a huge potential for improvement, and that probably the best organizations that are going to be able to put that in place will rise to the top. I really believe that, especially also from a global load management standpoint, athlete monitoring. That's come leaps and bounds in the last few years or decades in terms of tracking the data, getting GPSs in. But still, you look at the NFL and like, what is it, like 2 or 3 ACLs and even Achilles tendons and stuff like that every weekend. That's a lot of injuries for that level of the game. So what is going on? Are they underprepared? Are they overtrained? Are they? Is it just the cleats and the surface that does that promotes more injuries? But those are all things that again have a lot of room for improvement, and the human body is such that there's a lot of room for error, unfortunately, but it's at the cost of the athlete's health. From a coaching and programming standpoint. So I feel like that was one area. The other area that I'm really interested in, and I think will be a differentiator, I guess goes in the same line what I mentioned about GPS, is the technology that's available now and how that can inform our training and help us make smarter decisions. Talking about the Moxie, I know that both Andrew Feldman, whom I interviewed recently, and Evan Picon are both working on kind of practical ways to integrate that into endurance training in a way that it would give you instantaneous feedback as to how much time do you have until you can't sustain that pace anymore, given your SMO2 data and such things. And I think that can really kind of bring together the awareness, the self-awareness of the athlete when they're in training or in competition, being like, oh no, actually I thought that I couldn't go any farther, but that piece of equipment is now telling me that I probably have another couple minutes in the tank at that intensity, so I should really just push through it. And how that can change our perception, again, make smarter decisions if you're talking about bar speed and velocity based training, instead of just focusing on numbers on the bar. I think it just brings a more nuanced approach to the whole training paradigm, because you have that feedback, and I think feedback is very important to learn from what we do and do better next time. So I would say that those are the two big areas that I'll be hoping to see evolve the most in the coming years.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto a very important thing when it comes to that last one as well, like with recovery. Because if we continue at this rate with the way athletes are getting sustaining these injuries, and there's no sort of more in-depth sort of load monitoring and why they're getting overloaded, it could be a detrimental sort of outcome the future of our sport. So I think it's very important that we start to get a little bit more specific with our ability to monitor to monitor that. And I think there's just going to be more and more research coming out, and hopefully we can start to make a big change. So
yeah, I surely hope so.
I think I've lost you again.
I still hear you. I don't know if you hear me. I still hear you. You tell me when we're back online. You still there? I'm still there.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. You there?
Yeah, I can't see you. You're frozen. But anyway,
Okay.
I think that's all I think we're sort of wrapping up anyway. So thanks for chatting with me, and I'd love for you to send me through that stuff about the Moxie monitor and whatnot. That'd be good.
Cool. I'll send you that info right after. And if you have any questions, just shoot me a a DM or an email or whatever.
Awesome. Yeah, cool. Thanks so much for the chat. And yeah, I think the last couple of points that you brought up, that's exciting. That's stuff that I want to definitely pick your brains on a little bit more in future. So yeah, we'll chat soon.
Yeah, we'll do another one for sure. Take care.
All right. Bye, Sean.
Bye.